down here.
Who's this? And what the fuck is going on?
It's clear many consider Resident Evil 7 to be a return to the series' survival horror roots. What was originally going to be another action-oriented title, starring Leon and Sherry, who both find themselves in the middle of an outbreak in Italy. Which, if I'm being Frank West, sounds pretty cool. But it was scaled back, way back, to a single remote location, trading in those plates of spaghetti for a bowl of gumbo. The Bayou of Louisiana, taking you through one of the dankest haunted houses you're likely to ever experience. I'll be the first to admit, when Resident Evil 7 first released, I did not give this game a fair shake, playing only the very beginning, which I do feel gives the game a meteoric first impression, with the found footage sequence. Because of that, I was one of those people guilty of dismissing the game as an Outlast experience, which isn't exactly how I like my gumbo. Now, after finally giving RE7 another shot, and having played through it all, including the DLC, I could see just how much or not this game was Resident Evil in title only. So just how wrong was I? Well, I think RE7 is a horrific game, in the best of ways, and it's chock full of disgustingly beautiful terror.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna take you for a ride.
No!
In the main campaign, you take control of Ethan Winters, a new protagonist who sets out in the search of his missing wife after receiving her cryptic message. However, Ethan finds more than he bargained for when he arrives at the Baker's family home. Confirmed to take inspiration from Evil Dead, I also found this game has hints of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with its set of eccentric and disturbing characters. And I love the amount of dialogue and reactions you get when you're confronted by them. They're very well written. Coupled with that are some wickedly creative boss fights that get your blood flowing. In fact, I think these are some of the best fights in the series. Whether it's fighting the mother and her nasty infested Snatch, or early on when you're fighting the father, Jack, in the garage, playing a game of cat and mouse with a car. To take on these bosses and all of the game's basic enemies, you'll find all kinds of weapons around the Baker estate, from a measly pocket knife to a slew of firearms, one of which is in the literal sense. Who doesn't love a good flamethrower? I found the combat really satisfying. It's a little stiff and a little slow, but in a good way. So let's call it methodical. A purposeful limitation that adds to the horror and makes sense considering Ethan is just your regular Joe with no training, and he's thrown into this crazy situation. And despite the first-person perspective, these limitations do have it feeling overall pretty similar to the older Resident Evil games.
Daddy, right? You mind if I borrow Mommy for a little bit? Don't you stand there. Do something!
Ethan, help!
One of the game's main enemy types you'll encounter a lot is the Molded, which pose a much more significant threat than your standard zombie, with extended reach and the ability to sidestep your attacks. When you do land them though, you get a nice chunky head pop, and it's awesome. The enemies here always present a solid challenge that even when your arsenal is decked out, the horror is maintained, and they will have you begrudgingly walking down those hallways with caution. A new addition here is the option to block attacks and mitigate damage. This is something I often forgot to do in most of my playthrough, so trust me when I say it might save your life. When you're not fighting for your life, however, you'll be taking in this awesome, thick, and stinky atmosphere. In terms of both sound and the grimy visuals, there's all sorts of puzzles to solve, secrets to uncover, and new routes to explore. The exploration game is strong in this title, and you can take drugs or psychostimulants to help you track down any uncollected items. You'll also be finding VHS tapes that unveil more of the mystery surrounding the Baker family, some of which gets pretty twisted, like something straight out of a Saw movie. And you'll view these tapes in one of the many save rooms where you'll find the trusty storage boxes to manage your inventory. There's also the crafting system to make enhanced ammo, flame fuel, and of course the traditional herb mixin'.
Ah, fucking disgusting. Ugh. Ugh.
I played Resident Evil 7 on normal difficulty, but there are 3 options in total. Additionally, there's an easy mode for you babies out there, and there's an unlockable hard mode entitled Madhouse Mode, making items more scarce, enemies tougher, and introducing the classic ink ribbons in the form of cassette tapes. As for the main campaign, I came away loving it. It was one wild ride with lots of interesting twists and turns. My only real gripe was the story elements that tie this game into the larger Resident Evil universe, as I felt they were a little shoehorned in. I won't spoil the events for anyone who hasn't yet played it for themselves, but there was some decision making towards the end of the game that dictates whether you get the supposed good or bad ending. I'll just say I went with what was supposedly the bad ending. And after watching both, I gotta say, they're basically the exact same thing, but with different dialogue. And I honestly found the quote-unquote bad ending to end on a more interesting note. But frankly, if you're gonna have a non-canonical ending, you might as well go a little more crazy with it, instead of just having a more somber narration. It's no big deal, just a little nitpick. Last but not least is the DLC, which the Gold Edition comes packaged with. The first of which was a free DLC starring Chris titled Not a Hero. And for a free piece of content, I really enjoyed it, taking Chris through this elaborate scenario set after the main game against an antagonist who's very reminiscent of Jigsaw, creating these crazy death traps for Chris and his squad mates. This mode introduces a few new enemies, weapons, tricky puzzles, and a new boss to close it all out. Honestly, not too shabby. I think folks downplayed how good this little slice of DLC actually was. I enjoyed it a lot. There's also banned footage mode, similar to the VHS tapes you'll find in the main game with the other Baker family victims. And the final DLC, The End of Zoe. Now this DLC I recently played just before recording this voiceover, and hot damn. While it was short, it is the definition of short and sweet. A mode that has you playing as Jack's brother, Joe Baker, and he instantly became my favorite character of Resident Evil 7. A good old country boy who solves everything with his fists, just punching the shit out of every enemy in sight, comboing their heads clean off, and to top it off, you eventually get a cybernetic glove to enhance your left punch, as well as some handy dandy homemade bombs and spears to take care of them gators. If there was ever a Capcom All-Stars or another Marvel vs. Capcom, I want to see this man in the roster. Make him the game's boxer. That would be sick. Resident Evil 7 is also playable in VR, and while I did get the chance to try this way back when I first played the game, I no longer have PSVR because I could never maintain that sweet spot. The goggles just never sat quite right for me, which resulted in some extra blur. But I can imagine with it, it'd only add to this game's intensity. Even without it, what a roller coaster ride. So overall, it turns out it's true what they say. Resident Evil 7 most definitely brought back the series to its core survival horror roots, with an entry that rivals the best of them. It's the first Capcom game to utilize their in-house RE engine, and it's both a treat to look at and to play to this day. My opinion of the game has completely shifted from what was my initial impression. Can I say the same about the sequel Village? Well, I'll save that for another day. 7, though, is a true game of survival, and it's both worthy of the Resident Evil title and deserving of being called one of the best horror games, at least in my book. And like many of my favorite Resident Evils, I will definitely be playing it again in the future, because Resident Evil 7 is excellent.
That's how you get it done.